Everybody, my name is Andrew LeBlanc.
And I'm Eric Lewis.
Welcome to another episode of Town Talk. Tonight, we have the incredibly exciting topic of the budget. We're going to talk all about the 2021 budget tonight and all the glory that goes into it.
And if you're still with us, we're going to talk numbers. But we're going to keep this very high level. These numbers are all important. As residents, as taxpayers, they matter. But there's a lot of them. So we encourage you, if we talk about something in this episode, or you hear of something, or you're curious about something, reach out to your counselor, reach out to Town Hall. Please just reach out to Andrew. I have nothing to do with this. So questions to him.
Like Eric said, reach out to me or anybody at Town Hall. You can ask to talk to staff or anybody on council. We'd be happy to walk you through some more of the numbers.
So the budget process ended recently. You guys passed the 2021 budget. We're going to run through just a few highlights, the sort of the larger numbers, as kind of as context and a bit of information. The town has an operating budget in 2021 of $31 million. It's holding the tax rate for residents at 1.5926 per $100 of assessment. Can you explain that, Councillor? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, get it right. It's Deputy
What does that
Mayor.
mean?
Well, first and foremost, it means that we once again have the lowest tax rate in the tri-community, which is something that we're really happy about.
I didn't mean to set you up for sales pitch, but here we are.
But you did, and I'm happy to take the opportunity. So, yeah, really, I mean, I think it's, in terms of calculating, it's looking at your property tax or your assessment per $100 of your assessment, which is set by the province. That tax rate gets applied to it. So the municipality sets the rate, the province sets the assessment rate, and then combining the two together gets the property tax and the warrant number, which you're going to talk about in a few seconds.
So a 1 cent increase, if the town were to have done that on all residents, that would have equated to roughly $160,000 for the town. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And we should have added at the beginning of this, we have a ton of numbers in front of us. So if we're looking down constantly, that's why.
You didn't memorize all of these numbers?
I didn't even try to.
You got to prepare for these episodes, Eric.
I try sometimes. The property tax revenue that comes from residents and from commercial properties, it raises about $25.5 million for the town, which is up 2.8% over 2020. And another important figure, of course, is the debt service ratio. That's the portion of the town's budget that's going towards servicing debt. That's 10.51% of the budget. And then... do you want to talk a bit about the tax base, that piece of it?
So the tax base itself is really the value of the assessed property in the municipality. And so the provincial government gives us our assessment rate. Usually we have to wait a little bit for that number, but this year we got it before we went into deliberation. So we were able to put the budget together knowing what numbers we were going to have to work off of right away. So it's about $1.6 billion for our total tax rate for the town of Riverview, which is actually a 2.8 increase over last year as well. So that's why you see that reflected in the warrant raised as well.
And that's the tax base, correct? That's the value of all properties.
Yeah, that's all assessed property in the town of Riverview.
Okay, so those are kind of the high level numbers. I think we hit them all. The only other one that's sort of noteworthy is the water and sewer bill that we all receive. The town and TransAqua, because it's sort of the town's responsible for some of it. TransAqua, or formerly the Sewerage Commission, is responsible for the other portion, and that is being held at $904 for 2021, the same as this year.
That's right.
Okay. So those are the big numbers, the high level numbers. I hope we were clear enough.
I'm tired already, Eric.
Yeah, I know. This is maybe simpler. Can you tell us a bit about the budget process? I know it takes months for staff and council to do this. Give us a bit of a rundown of how that works.
Yeah, sure. So we got some questions on this year. We actually took deliberations. It only took 1 day for us. So on the surface, it might seem like, oh, council only spent 1 day deliberating our entire gazillion-dollar budget. And No, that's not how the budget process works. And before I get into that, I really need to give a lot of praise and kudos to our staff team who do an incredible job putting this together. They work so hard to present a budget to council that adheres to some of the parameters that we established much earlier in the year. So it's important to talk about what that process looks like. So normally, around June or halfway through the year, we would start looking at the capital plan and review that or endorse the capital plan. This year it happened in September just because everybody's schedules are thrown out of whack this year. So council had already previously approved the capital plan. So that's a big chunk of the budget, and we'll talk about it a little bit later today. So we go through that. We also give key directives and assumptions to the staff, some parameters on which we require them to build their budgets, and then present back to us following those things. So we kind of lay out what the goals are, what we'd like to see a lot earlier than when the actual deliberation day is. Staff they work really hard starting in the fall to build all the budgets. Then we invite some community organizations in to present to us, and we'll talk a little bit about what some of those numbers are later. So we hear from those community organizations, we get a chance to ask them some questions. Obviously, if a municipality is going to be funding agencies in the community, we want a chance to connect with them and hear how they're using taxpayer dollars. And then we go into our own deliberations, and that's when the staff present their individual departmental budgets back to council. The CAO does an overview with us, and then our Director of Finance, Robert Hakesing, walks us through the whole day. We go through department by department. We do operating and utility budgets. And it's a wonderful day of discussion. So what happens is council will give consensus votes on everything. So if there's a particular item, we want an increase in street patching or something like that, we'll say, okay, well, council gives consensus approval to increase that line item. And then the next formal meeting, council will formally endorse and adopt the budget. We'll pass formal motions to approve each individual budget, utility, operating, all of the capital things as well.
So you said, to me at least, that this is one of the most challenging things you do as a councillor. Can you talk a bit about that? I mean, you're deciding the fate, or helping decide the fate, of a $31 million budget. So
yeah,
does that weigh on you?
Gazillion earlier. I guess gazillion was off. It's 31 million.
Only slightly. I'm a writer. I don't do math. I think they're close.
Ballpark, yeah. It's. I think it's one of the more challenging things. Not because it's it can be difficult, I guess, but I say challenging in the sense that it's one of the most important things we do. Approving, especially the capital budgets. I mean, those are all about planning for the future. We're trying to keep the town on course for our strategic plan. We're trying to build a future for our residents. We want to build a community that our young people are going to be able to grow up in and want to come back to once they're, presumably done with things like post-secondary education and things like that. We want you to be able to come back and have a community that you want to live in, you want to stay in. So I think from that perspective, it can be a challenge. It's a lot of pressure, I guess, to make sure that we're looking at the right kind of investment. It's about investing in new things, but also maintaining the existing assets. A lot of municipalities now are building asset management plans. I think it's actually a requirement that we have to start looking internally at those things. So we do, I think we do a great job of assessing what the current needs are, balancing it with what the future needs are, to maintain existing infrastructure and to invest in new.
And you're deciding all this on behalf of residents.
Yeah.
So do you get much in the way of feedback after a budget or in the middle of a year about why are you investing money in this or this thing or my street or whatever it might be?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think streets definitely. We've done resident surveys before, and pretty consistently, streets are the number one thing every time that residents want to be the priority. So you definitely, I think if you're, this is my opinion, I think if you're doing your job well as an elected official, then you should be staying in contact with residents throughout the year. You should be as in tune as possible to what the desires of your residents are, to know how big residents want to grow, what sorts of amenities they would like to see in the town. Maybe they want to see more services. Maybe there needs to be more programming. So things like that have to be taken into consideration. That said, the staff do a really good job of staying in touch with resident needs as well, especially in Parks and Recreation. I mean, they have staff working frontline all the time, so they're able to really easily assess what the needs are in the community. So they do a really good job with things like that. So yeah, we absolutely get feedback throughout the year. And then I guess, from my own perspective, I go in trying to make sure that the votes that I make and the priorities that I want to be in favor of throughout the budget process are reflective of the feedback that I'm hearing from residents in the community, but also informed decisions based on the data that we are seeing, based on best practices in municipalities, based on, planning for future infrastructure and things like that, all the research that gets presented to us. So it's a balance of the two, I think.
Okay. Let's dive into more numbers.
Yeah.
We're going to look at two big pieces here: the general operating budget and the capital budget. So let's do the operating one first. During deliberations, I read in the media reports that town staff reported that the town is actually in quite a stable financial position despite COVID. So that's a positive thing, certainly. Some of the things mentioned from the deliberations: the town currently has 103 full-time employees, looking at adding one more full-time staff and allocating some funding for a few other potential new positions. Kodiak Transpo.
If I can go back to reporting on the stable financial position, I guess one thing I should add on that is this year it looks to be that we're in a fairly stable financial position. I think the key will be measuring future years and what things like transfer payments look like. How the rest of the country has been impacted, what kind of money the province and the federal government are able to move to municipalities, and what their ability is. Obviously, both levels of government are incurring a significant amount of debt because of COVID-19, and so that could impact their ability to fund, infrastructure programs or different things like that that they use to support municipalities. And so we could see an impact in the future. That's speculation. We don't know what that's going to bring, so we're just going to have to roll with the punches on that. But I thought I should add that little caveat.
Sure. And to that point, I mean, I remember, 5-7 years ago when I was reporting on Riverview Council, the debt service ratio was, I think, like 15 to 17-ish%, which was still well within the threshold you have to meet, which I think is around 20 or so.
20%, yeah.
Yeah, and now you're down to 10.5. So that, as a resident, that means to me that you're really trying to manage that debt well, and so that's great to hear.
So we incur debt, for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with the process, usually when we borrow funds for capital projects. So I think the debt ratio, if memory serves me correct, this was before my time, but I believe the debt ratio got up as high as it did because of the funds that were borrowed to build Gunningsville Boulevard. And so through some great planning by our finance department, we looked at making some balloon payments on that debt to really bring it down. And the reason we did that is because we know that we have some significant projects on the horizon in the capital budget. And so we want to make sure that we're well positioned to be able to absorb the costs for those particular projects and not be in a perilous position.
Okay. So some of the highlights, looking at adding a few more staff potentially in 2021. Kodiak Transpo, which has, like a lot of organizations, had to sort of really scale back what they were doing because of COVID-19. They're looking at bringing services back to up to 70% in 2021. So that's a positive thing. Mm-hmm. It's worth noting too, and you mentioned this earlier, that the town contributes pretty significant funding to some community organizations. So the numbers, again, I'm looking here a lot, $53,600 to the Riverview Boys and Girls Club, certainly a great organization in the community. The Riverview Arts Center, which we profiled here on a recent community spotlight, is $59,000. Mm-hmm. The Capitol Theater in Moncton, $75,000, and the Riverview Public Library, $11,000. So obviously, I don't know if you want to comment on those. Those are all great community organizations.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing to note is that we have another roughly $100,000 in the budget that goes to different groups and grants throughout the year. So these are the main ones that have line items in the municipal budget, but we have annual grants that we look at. So there's different community organizations like Food Bank and the Sea Cadets and a whole bunch of other groups that apply for funding. And so throughout the year on a month-to-month basis, we look at awarding some of those grants. You know, in a regular year, it might be students traveling for a sports tournament or something like that. I think from my perspective, the reason why these kind of expenses are really important is because I see them as an investment in the community. I think we have a responsibility, as I said before, it's all about building a community that our residents want to live in. And part of that means investing in community groups that are helping us provide some of those services. And, you know, we could talk about any one of them. I'm involved with the Riverview Arts Center on the board. Obviously, I have a lengthy career with the Boys and Girls Club as well. And so those organizations are putting a lot back into our community. Arts is a pillar of the strategic plan. The Boys and Girls Club, for example, is offering some incredible and unique programming for kids from after school age to teenagers. They're doing such incredible work. Capitol Theatre, obviously, offering some great services to our residents as well. And the public library has some wonderful programming as well. So they're all contributing something unique to building that, you know, holistic community, that great feel that we want, and contributing to the culture of our town. And so it's an important investment that I think municipalities need to make. And I think we do fairly well with the amount of tax dollars we have to work with.
Excellent. Moving on, again, a lot of numbers here. The RCMP budget, that's something obviously shared with Moncton Riverview and Dieppe. That's the Kodiak RCMP detachment. The town of Riverview's share of that in 2021 is $3.6 million, which represents almost 11%, 10.99% of the overall RCMP budget. Obviously, Riverview is the smaller of the three communities, but how is that funding determined? How is it determined that Riverview pays X amount?
So that percentage is built based on service calls. So an interesting point to note is that our service calls are actually going down in Riverview. So that rate has actually dropped to 10.99% since last year. So we're seeing fewer calls to the RCMP, which is interesting because we've talked about it before in terms of, you know, what some of the perceptions are around increased crime rates and things like that. So I think as we're looking at how are we addressing some of these issues around crime and public safety, we need to be reminding residents, make sure you call the RCMP if something is going on, because this is one of the ways we can determine how many calls are going out. Our rate is going down because fewer calls are coming in.
That is interesting. And there's an RCMP increase. Can you explain that? It's an increase because of costs assigned from dispatch services. It's $93,000. What does that mean?
Well, so the percentage has gone down that we're paying, but the RCMP budget itself has increased. So there's a minor increase in what their budget. That particular line item, the $93,000 for dispatch services, is actually increasing the fire budget. So normally those costs were reflected in the RCMP expenses, and now the costs for some of those dispatch services are now being reflected in the fire and rescue budget. So you'll see it may not show it in the RCMP line item in particular, but they are still affiliated, but it's just being reflected in the fire budget.
Okay, gotcha. We've talked about Kodiak Transpo, we've talked about community groups, RCMP. Another organization that the town splits the cost with Moncton and Dieppe is 3Plus, the Economic Development Agency, and the town's portion of that is $78,000. And then this is a whole different thing, but the town's actually receiving $800,000 from the sale of the Fundy Chocolate River Station. So what does that mean? What do you do when you get $800,000 from the sale of a property?
We smile. So you know, we covered this particular project in a previous episode, so I think a lot of the details are there. But yeah, we are looking at getting $800,000 in revenue for the sale of that particular property. That'll go into the reserves, and it's a great help for us when we're looking at some of these key projects that we have coming up. in particular looking into the capital budget. There's lots of big things that we need to look at paying for, which is a great segue into let's talk about the capital highlights.
Wait, just a second. When you said reserves, that's like basically like a pot of money that's there for when you need it for something someday. Is that the idea?
Yeah, and we can designate funds into like the capital reserve, for example. Like I think we've been putting money aside for the recreation complex, so we can designate money into the reserve account specifically for that project. There's always a transfer from operating to capital from operating, and so that those funds are earmarked to help with specific projects or to help with different elements of the capital.
Okay, so you were transitioning, I think.
Staff can correct me on anything that I'm screwing up here. So it's
residents might correct you. We don't know.
Residents might. Please go ahead. Use the comment section. That's all right.
So capital budget. We've hit the high points. We've talked about the general operating, and now this is sort of the fun part, because this is the stuff that the more tangible things that people will see, the park things, the roads and whatnot. So what's up with the capital budget?
What isn't up with the capital budget?
It's a great question.
It's our 10-year capital plan, I think, is over $100 million in expenses. There's a lot of really neat things that are in there. We're really trying to be strategic in how we plan for the growth of the town. Obviously, the number one expense, something we have talked about in a previous episode, is the recreation complex. The big question mark on that one is going to be provincial and federal level of funding. Are we going to get the support from the other levels of government? We're really hoping that happens. No commitment on anything to my knowledge yet. So that's a big question mark for us on what that's going to look like. But yeah, that's a pretty big expense for us. In 2021, we have $1.8 million in the capital budget for this project. That'll, from what I gather, that's coming a little bit later in the year. We're going to look at doing some of the site preparation and getting things ready to go. Then in 2022, we do the groundbreaking, and then in 2023, we wrap things up, and we have a wonderful new recreation complex.
That's exciting. That'll be cool. I hope it. I hope everything moves along smoothly with that one. So
you and me both.
Yeah. So I'm going to rattle off a few projects here. They're all road and sidewalk and et cetera related. But these are always of interest to residents because people want to know if their road's being fixed up or their parents' road or the park they go to or whatever. So some of the road work planned for 2021. There's $1.5 million designated to the reconstruction of the road and water main renewal for a portion of Montgomery Avenue from Fairfax to White Pine. That's in Central Riverview for those who don't know. So that's sort of the big one for the year. That's a major reconstruction. Toth Street in Point Park, $400,000 for reconstruction of the road and water main again. Sidewalks on Irving and Callow Hill Road in the west end of town. That's $300,000. So that's I guess a chunk of sidewalk on a fairly long piece of road there. And then there's asphalt seal or resurfacing to Hebron, Cosburn, Nowlin, Belfast, Sanford, Irving, Simpson, and Lansdowne. And all of those together come at a cost of about $855,000. So that's a lot of road work, sidewalk work. Do you have any sense of? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and that goes back to that comment that I made earlier about the resident surveys and how residents have clearly indicated that streets are the number one priority for them and making sure that we have safe roads to travel on. Mm-hmm. And so we've been, at least since I've been on council anyway, we've been very diligent in our conversations to make sure that there is significant investment in our roads, our maintenance and repair, and building new infrastructure and making sure that we have a great network of roads in the town.
Mm-hmm. Now, that's a fair chunk of money. That's a number of streets I rattled off there. But there's obviously way, way more streets in the town, some of which are in great shape. They might be brand new roads or have recently been repaired, but there's a lot of older streets too. So you can't spend it all in 1 year. How do you go about determining, okay, what can we do this year? What needs to be done and what can we actually afford to do?
It's a really great process that we have in place. And I won't admit to understanding all of the ins and outs of how they build those things. But we did an analysis or a study of all of our roads a number of years ago now. And so that program, I guess for lack of a better way to phrase it, takes the politics out of deciding how our roads are going to be done. So it's not about, I'm going to lobby my councillor to make sure that they advocate for my road to get done. The way it works is there's an understanding of what the underground infrastructure needs are, what the surface level needs are, and so they marry those two things together so that, if my street needs new sewer lines or needs repairs underground and needs the road resurfaced, we're going to make sure we do those things in the same year so that we don't pay for resurfacing 1 year and then 3 years down the road be like, oh, well, I guess it's time to do that underground work because we've had 14,000 water main breaks and we got to fix all that. So it's a matter of cost savings. So we'll put all of that together and make sure that we're spending wisely. And that is a really key element of how some of the road work is decided, about marrying those two things together and making sure that's done efficiently. And then they have a great analysis or a study done of all of the different work that needs to happen to maintain the roads. There's different levels of grading the streets and prioritizing the different, whether it's an arterial street or a collector or whatever they want to classify them. They all get classified differently, and so priority gets assigned to different roads that way. And so it's a really great process to make sure that we are investing in the big stuff for the local improvements, and we're also maintaining surface level stuff and resurfacing and patching and all of those things too. That was a really poor way to explain it, and I'm sure anyone who knows anything about the details of that study is saying he used bad words there.
Is there, because again, as you said, this is a topic that is very near and dear to residents' hearts. They want decent roads to drive on. So it sounds like there's a process in place, but is there a piece of that considers, okay, we're not ready to do this just yet, but we know residents are clamoring for that road. There's a lot of people that live there. Is there sort of a resident feedback piece to this where residents can say, listen, this road is terrible, and can you look at this? How does that fit in?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we absolutely take resident feedback into consideration, but there are a number of things that go into consideration when determining what streets need to be done. And it has to make good fiscal sense if we're going to do it in that particular year versus another year. Residents are a key element in identifying some of the big challenges that are happening on the streets. Like if they're letting us know for patching, like, hey, there's giant holes in my road, please come fix them. We're like, oh, well, sorry about that. Let's go patch your road. And
I want to see you patching the road.
I wouldn't be the first time I was asked to do that. So I think if you looked at the results afterwards, you would not want me to be the one personally patching.
That's fair. He's not a handy guy. He's not a handy guy.
No, I play guitar.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
So that's the road piece. There's a few more numbers here we'll rattle off. There's $180,000 the town has budgeted for lighting on the new bridge. Mm-hmm. That is the replacing the causeway. That's part of an agreement with the province. The town will pay for some of the lighting. Town's looking at spending $310,000 for a plow truck, $150,000 for a backhoe, and $700,000 for 2 new loaders. And the last thing I have in front of me that we wanted to sort of highlight, $150,000 for Mill Creek Nature Park to continue building trails on the south side of the park. So that's a really long-term project with different investments every year to continue to build it and maintain it, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think as the town changes and we start looking at different visions for the future, there's always going to be new opportunities that'll come up. But holy cow, Mill Creek has grown extensively and such a wonderful asset. And so, we want to keep investing in that park and making sure that we take care of it, but we keep growing it to make sure it's meeting the needs of the residents. And all the kudos in the world to Parks and Recreation for the incredible work they've done to put Mill Creek together. It's a tremendous asset for this town.
Yeah, we've gotten a fair bit of use out of it in the summer and even now in the fall, because It's pretty nice fall so far, and there's not much to do. So I try to go outside as much as I can. Can't see people very much, but I can see them from a distance and wave. So that's kind of what we wanted to highlight from the 2021 budget. But before we go, I know that there's things that every year that council's like, we want to do this, we want to do that. You can't do them all. So are there some things that that you guys have been looking at potentially doing in 2021 that you've had to defer to the next year or 5 years or whatever that is?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we unfortunately did have to move out of 2021. The first one was funding for an outdoor skate park. So that's been looked at for, I think, the last 2 years, maybe longer. My memory doesn't fail me. But we started looking into that project. There's a lot of work that has to be done around that particular site in terms of traffic flow and patterns. So once we started looking at doing the outdoor skate park, we had to look at the entire recreation asset that exists down there. So that's what was the old Kinsman building, the Riverview Community Hall building, the Byron Dobson Arena, the Parks and Rec offices, that whole area. It needs some work. It's got some real aging infrastructure that needs to be looked at. The Riverview Community Hall in particular needs some work. So we have to look at how we're going to address that. If we're going to make some significant changes down there, it doesn't make sense to invest in the skate park just yet because we might have to redo everything. So
Right.
So we just don't know what that could look like yet, and there's some more research that has to be done before we invest that money. And I think it was a pretty decent number. I can't remember. I think it was like $4.7 million for the entire project that was going to need. Don't quote me on that number. I'm trying to go off memory, and it's almost 10 o'clock at night. I don't know why we chose to do. We film our budget episode this late at night is beyond me. But
Yeah,
here we are.
It doesn't make sense, but here we are anyway.
The second thing is the roundabout. There's been a lot of talk about the roundabout that's going to go on the corner of Pine Glen and Pinewood.
Right.
An important project. With the work that's going to happen with the causeway next year, we felt it wasn't necessarily in the town's best interest to have another project happening at the same time that would disrupt traffic patterns. So we did move that one to 2022 as well.
Yeah, because those Pinewood, Pine Glen, the McAllister Parks right there, that's a pretty significant, and a retail hub too. So you'd really be messing with things to do that at the same time. Yeah.
Very true.
So that's kind of a very high level 32-minute look at Riverview's 2021 budget. I hope we covered everything reasonably well and we weren't too confusing and weren't tripping over ourselves too much because of all the numbers.
And there's so much more that we could have covered. We could have got into more detail about what the different departments are doing. There's other things in the capital plan. These are just a couple of things that stuck out for Eric and I that we thought were really important to cover. And we hope you took something out of it tonight. So,
and if you don't like it, talk to Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Town Talk. Please follow us on Facebook. We're looking to ramp that up a little bit and share some more fun stuff, some historical Riverview stuff and some other things too. So follow along.
Thanks, everybody.